When power collides with controversy, it's not just public opinion that bears the weight, but also the very pillars of legal stability. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States and a figure who remains synonymous with political turbulence, is once again in the spotlight. But this time, it's not for a campaign rally or a dramatic post on social media. It's for a major legal challenge brought forward by 12 U.S. states, accusing him of overreach through one of his administration's most controversial economic decisions: the imposition of aggressive tax tariffs. Welcome to TVAI. Here we don't just tell stories. We reveal the structure behind the headlines. This is a deep dive into the case shaking America's legal and political foundations. The story begins not in a courtroom, but in the very core of Trump's economic strategy during his tenure as president. Branded under the nationalist slogan, "America First," Trump's administration took sweeping steps to reshape U.S. trade policies, specifically through the use of tariffs aimed at foreign imports. The rationale? Protect American industries, revive domestic manufacturing, and reclaim jobs lost to outsourcing and globalization. It sounded like a solid plan to many. In 2018, under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on imported steel and 10% on imported aluminum, citing national security concerns. Later, tariffs expanded under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 to target Chinese goods, hundreds of billions of dollars worth. But what began as a strategic economic maneuver quickly spiraled into a polarizing policy decision. Critics warned that the tariffs were less about national security and more about economic isolationism. As industries began to feel the impact of rising import costs, supply chains tightened, retaliatory tariffs from trade partners rolled in, and inflation crept higher, the consequences became tangible. Fast forward to 2025. 12 U.S. states have filed a joint lawsuit arguing that Trump's tariff actions were unconstitutional and economically damaging to their residents. These states, including California, New York, Illinois, Washington, and Massachusetts, are demanding accountability not only for the economic disruptions they claim were caused by the tariffs but also for what they see as an abuse of executive power. The lawsuit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, and it alleges that the Trump administration failed to provide sufficient legal justification for the tariffs, particularly in invoking national security provisions as a pretext. It further accuses the administration of bypassing Congress, something legal scholars have debated for years in terms of the balance of powers in trade regulation. California Attorney General Leticia Ramos, speaking at a press conference, stated, "This lawsuit is not about partisan politics. It's about the livelihoods of millions of Americans who suffered under an arbitrary and unilateral economic policy. These tariffs hurt farmers, manufacturers, small businesses, and families. They were implemented without accountability, without oversight, and without a clear legal foundation. The economic toll is hard to ignore. In states like Illinois and Iowa, where agriculture is a major economic engine, retaliatory tariffs from countries like China and Mexico drastically cut exports of soybeans, pork, and corn. Farmers were left scrambling to find new markets, while government subsidies tried, but often failed, to fill the gaps. In New York and California, technology and automotive sectors faced steep increases in production costs due to higher prices for imported components. Small businesses, often operating on thin margins, were among the hardest hit, with some even closing their doors permanently. For example, a family-owned metalworking company in Ohio, employing 150 people, reported a 32% increase in material costs within a year of the steel tariffs. They were forced to lay off 40 employees just to stay afloat. The ripple effects extended beyond borders. U.S. allies, including Canada and the European Union, retaliated with tariffs of their own, targeting American goods such as whiskey, motorcycles, and orange juice. Diplomatic ties were strained, and long-standing trade alliances came under pressure. Back to the courtroom. Legal experts say this case could set a significant precedent. If the court sides with the plaintiff states, it could lead to a re-examination of presidential powers in economic matters, particularly in using national security as a justification for sweeping economic actions. Constitutional law professor Dr. Elena McAdams from Georgetown University explains, "The courts have historically granted presidents a wide berth when it comes to trade policy, especially under the guise of national security. But if a pattern emerges where national security becomes a catch-all justification for economic experimentation, there's a real risk to the checks and balances intended by the Constitution." Trump's legal team has already issued a preliminary response, calling the lawsuit politically motivated and legally baseless. In a statement, his spokesperson said, President Trump acted within the legal authority granted to him by Congress and in the best interest of the American people. These tariffs were necessary to combat unfair trade practices, protect national security, and level the playing field. Interestingly, not all the 12 states are firmly blue. Some of them, such as Michigan and Pennsylvania, are considered swing states that supported Trump in previous elections but have increasingly shifted toward a more centrist voter base. This suggests that the lawsuit may resonate with voters across the political spectrum, especially those directly impacted by tariff policies. Political analysts are already speculating on the implications this lawsuit could have on Trump's political future, particularly as he eyes another run for the presidency. While his supporters see him as a bold leader who stood up to global economic bullies, critics argue that his policies caused unnecessary financial strain and disrupted international stability. This legal development arrives at a time when the Republican Party itself is grappling with internal divisions between traditional conservatives and the populist wave Trump brought into the mainstream. A ruling against Trump could be used as ammunition by both his detractors and potential rivals within the party. From a geopolitical standpoint, the lawsuit also sends a message to America's trade partners. It signals that even within the U.S., there are legal and political mechanisms in place to challenge executive actions that affect global commerce. It's a reminder that U.S. trade policy is not solely shaped by the White House. It is also subject to domestic political scrutiny and legal boundaries. In the coming months, as the legal process unfolds, depositions will be taken, evidence will be examined, and testimonies from economic experts, former officials, and affected business owners will be key. The outcome could reverberate across sectors, from agriculture and technology to international trade agreements. But beyond the legal proceedings and political calculations, there is a human element to this story. The farmers who lost their markets, the factory workers who lost their jobs, the small business owners who watched decades of work collapse under the weight of rising costs. Their voices will be heard in court, but they are already speaking through the data. Higher prices, slowed growth, and increased uncertainty. This lawsuit is not just about tariffs. It's about the scope of presidential power, the role of states in federal oversight, and the future direction of American economic policy. What makes this moment particularly significant is the timing. With the nation gearing up for another election cycle, and with Trump potentially back on the campaign trail, the legal outcomes of this case may play directly into the political narrative. If the courts find that the former president overstepped legal bounds, it could alter the public's perception not only of his policies but of the broader role of executive authority in trade matters. There is also the question of financial restitution. Several of the plaintiff states are seeking compensation for economic damages caused by the tariffs, particularly to farmers and small manufacturers. Legal observers say the amount in question could climb into the billions, especially if punitive damages are considered. Meanwhile, international markets are also watching closely. Investors are wary of how this lawsuit might affect future trade policy stability in the U.S., particularly under a potential second Trump administration. The global economy, already fragile in some areas, could face renewed volatility depending on the case's outcome. In Congress, the lawsuit has rekindled debates over the need for reform in trade-related presidential powers. Several bipartisan proposals have been floated in recent years to rein in executive latitude when invoking national security as justification for trade measures. The current case may add urgency to those discussions. Senator Mark Reynolds, a moderate Democrat from Ohio, stated, "There has to be a better balance. National security is important, but it shouldn't become a blanket term to bypass Congress and disrupt entire industries. This case could be a catalyst for long overdue reform." Republican lawmakers are more divided. While some echo Reynolds' sentiments in private, few are willing to publicly challenge Trump due to his influence within the party base. Still, the growing conversation around checks and balances is one that will likely persist beyond the courtroom. Ultimately, the heart of this case lies not in the tariffs themselves, but in the mechanisms through which they were imposed. Were the actions taken based on legitimate security concerns, or were they a political tool disguised in legal terminology? This is the core issue the courts must decide. The outcome will not only define a significant chapter in Trump's legacy, but also shape the future relationship between the presidency and the American economy. At TVAI, we will continue tracking every development, interviewing key stakeholders, and analyzing the broader implications of this historic case. Because behind every courtroom battle lies a deeper story. One that affects real people, real businesses, and the democratic principles that hold a nation together. Stay with us. I'm TVAI. Thank you for watching.